The file was already stamped and sealed by the time Counselor Stravon set it down on his desk. He did not need to read it again. He had written most of it himself. The assignment was simple on paper. One human. Sector 9. The Veil Wastes. The trial period was set at 72 hours, standard for Apex class zones. No species had ever completed it. That was the point. Stravon leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. The Sovereignty Council chamber was quiet at this hour. The other seats were empty. Good. Some conversations were better had alone. Humanity had moved through the qualification tiers too quickly. That was the problem. 2 years. Every other species in recorded sovereignty history had taken between 15 and 40 years to pass basic cultural integration, language certification, and aptitude assessment. Humans had done it in 2. Not because they cheated. That had been checked 3 times. They had simply worked at it without stopping. That kind of hunger made other species nervous. It made Stravon nervous. He called up the charter on his screen and found the clause he needed. Trial sector assignment was at the discretion of the committee chair when special ecological considerations applied. Sector 9 qualified. The Veil Wastes were classified as a condemned zone, too dangerous for settlement, too unstable for research. Sending a trial candidate there was unusual. It was not, technically, against the rules that he approved the assignment and closed the file. The junior observer assigned to document the trial was a young Sarati named Riva. She reported to the transit bay the next morning with her recording equipment and a data tablet full of pre-written observation templates. She had done 12 trials before this one. They were usually quiet affairs. The candidate moved through the zone, completed the survival tasks, and came home. Riva wrote her report. Everyone went on with their lives. She pulled up the Sector 9 file on the journey to the docking arm and read it twice. Then she read it a third time, slowly. Completed trials on record. 12 attempted. 12 terminated. Average survival time, 41 hours. Cause of termination in 11 of 12 cases. Apex predator contact. The 12th had died from a fall. She stood at the docking arm entrance and thought about raising a concern. She was junior. Stravon was the committee chair. The assignment had already been stamped. She told herself it was not her place. She boarded the transport. The human was already seated when she arrived. Darren Cole, age 31, former field ranger, Earth's Northern Conservation District, a place called Siberia. She had looked it up. Cold, remote, the kind of landscape that swallowed people who were not paying attention. He was reading a small paper notebook. Not a data pad, actual paper, with a worn cover and ink marks along the edges. He looked up when she sat across from him and gave her a simple nod. "You are the observer?" he asked. "Yes," Rivas said. "I will be monitoring from the secondary vessel during the trial period." He nodded again and looked back at his notebook. Riva pulled up her tablet and began running pre-checks. After a few minutes, she noticed he was watching her work with quiet curiosity. "The animals in the zone," he said. "Are there any field reports on their behavior patterns? Territorial boundaries, social structure, that kind of thing?" Riva looked at him. "The zone has 3 classified apex species. They are considered extremely hostile." "Sure," he said. "Were there field reports? Even old survey data?" She opened the restricted section of the file and found 2 survey reports from a research team that had flown over the wastes 15 years ago. She sent them to his pad without fully understanding why. He read them carefully, made notes in his paper book, and said thank you. He did not ask about weapons. He did not ask about extraction timing or emergency protocols. He asked if the dust stalker species was known to be pack-bonded or solitary. Riva told him pack-bonded, territorial, and extremely aggressive toward anything that moved fast. He wrote that down. The transport reached the drop coordinates as the Veil Sun began to climb. The waste stretched below, flat, rust-colored scrubland broken by deep rock formations and wide basins of cracked earth. Nothing green, nothing soft, the kind of place that looked like it was waiting. Darren Cole stood at the open bay door with his trial kit on his back and his paper notebook tucked into his chest pocket. He looked down at the ground below the way a man looks at a problem he is trying to solve. 72 hours, Rivas said. It was what she was supposed to say. "Right," he said, and stepped off. The transport lifted. Riva moved to the monitor station and brought up the ground feeds. She watched the dust settle below where he had landed. He was already walking, not fast, not slow. Steady. He was looking at the ground as he moved. The monitoring system clicked on. The timer started 72 hours. Riva sat down and opened her observation template. Under the first field, where she was supposed to write the candidate's initial status, she paused for a long moment. She typed, "Candidate is calm. Candidate is reading the ground." She stared at that for a while. Then she closed the template and just watched the feed. The scrubland was dry and hard underfoot, and it smelled like iron and something older than rust. Darren moved without hurrying, keeping his steps even and light. The way he had learned to walk in places where sound carried and everything listened, he found the first signs within 20 minutes. Long claw marks dragged across a flat rock face at roughly chest height. He crouched and studied them. For parallel lines, deep, spaced about the width of his hand. The rock was scratched clean. Whatever had made this mark did it often. The same spot, the same motion. A territorial boundary marker. He took out his notebook and drew a rough sketch of the marks with their dimensions. He noted the direction they faced and which way the surrounding disturbed soil pointed. Then he stood and looked at the landscape differently. Not as terrain, as a map someone else had already drawn. The survey reports had given him rough coordinates for dusk stalker sightings 15 years ago. The territory had likely shifted, but predator species tended to anchor to strong geographic features: ridgelines, water sources, the edges of open ground. He looked at the basin ahead of him and decided not to walk into the center of it. He walked along the edge instead. WY midday, he had found 3 more boundary markers and 1 clear trail. A packed line through the dry grass where heavy bodies moved repeatedly. He followed it at a parallel distance of about 30 meters, reading the story it told him. The pack was large, probably 6 to 10 adults. They patrolled at dawn and again before dark. Based on how the pressed grass had dried at different rates, he was writing this down when the juvenile appeared. He came out of the rock shadow to his left, maybe 15 meters away. Small for an apex predator, probably 2 years old, based on the survey descriptions. 6 limbs, the back for use for running, the front 2 raised slightly and ending in wide, curved claws. Its coloring was darker than the adults described in the reports. Brown and gray, like the stone itself. The IT was looking directly at him on the secondary vessel. Riva's fingers went still over her tablet. The monitor flagged the contact and sent an alert to the council feed. In the council chamber, Counselor Shravan leaned forward in his seat. Darren did not run. He did not reach for his knife. He turned to face the juvenile fully, and then he bent his knees slowly and lowered himself until he was kneeling on the ground. He dropped his gaze to the dirt in front of him. He let his hands rest open on his thighs that he made himself small. The juvenile moved in a slow arc around him, its head low, nostrils working. It covered the full circle twice. Each time it came close, it would stop and hold its position for several seconds before continuing. It was not stalking. It was assessing. 0.7 minutes passed, then 8, then 11. Riva was not breathing properly. She had her hand pressed flat against the edge of her console. The juvenile moved in close enough that Darren could have reached out and touched it. It put its face down near his shoulder and inhaled for a long time. Then it made a sound, low, not aggressive, something between a rumble and a click, and it stepped back. It turned away from him and walked back toward the rock shadows. Before it disappeared, it stopped once and looked back. Then it was gone. Darren held his position for another full minute. Then he exhaled slowly through his nose and reached for his notebook that he wrote, "Pack-bonded juvenile, approximate 2 years. Non-aggressive response to submissive posture. No teeth shown, no charge. Curiosity behavior, not predatory. Territorial, but not provoked by stillness. Same rules as wolves. Same rules as bears. Hierarchy in threat reading. If you're not prey and you're not a threat, you're simply a thing that exists in the territory." But he underlined that last part. He stood slowly and continued walking along the edge of the basin. In the council chamber, one of Shravan's advisors said quietly that the contact sensors must have misread. Shravan did not respond. He was watching the feed with very still eyes. Riva opened her observation log and typed for a long time. She described everything she had seen in exact detail. The posture, the timing, the juvenile's behavior, all of it. She flagged it as a significant behavioral event requiring notation in the final trial report. Then she sat back and looked at the live feed where Darren was crouching near a dry creek bed and sketching something in his notebook. She thought about the question he had asked on the transport. Are there field reports on their behavior patterns? Not. How do I survive this? Not. What is the fastest route to the extraction point? He had wanted to know how the animals lived. She was beginning to understand. Why? That night, Darren built a small fire. He did not hide it. He let it burn open and visible in the dark. Riva watched him sit beside it, writing in his notebook, the fire throwing orange light across the ground. Nothing came toward it, but at the edge of the firelight, just inside the darkness, two small reflected lights hovered at ground level for more than an hour before they finally disappeared. The juvenile. Watching from the boundary of what it knew, Riva added that to her report too. The flat ground at the center of the southern basin looked solid. Darren stood at its edge on the second morning and studied the way the dust stalker pack moved around it. They did not cross it. They went wide every time, adding distance to their patrol route rather than cutting straight across the open space. Animals did not waste energy. If they were going around something, there was a reason that he crouched and pressed his hand flat to the earth near the edge. The ground had a faint hollow quality under the pressure of his palm. Not quite vibration, but the kind of give that told him there was nothing solid beneath the surface for a long way down. He had felt something like it once before in Yakutia, standing over a tunnel system that large burrowing animals had carved out across an entire hillside, that he stood and looked at the basin differently. He did not step onto it. The monitoring drone Riva had moved in for a closer ground-level reading was hovering about 20 meters out over the flat Earth when the surface exploded. The iron hollow came up through the ground like something that had decided the world above was simply in its way. It was enormous. The survey reports had estimated 8 meters in length, but that had not prepared Riva for watching it happen in real time. Blind, massive, its skin the gray-white color of deep stone, it thrashed upward through the broken earth and immediately oriented toward the drone's electromagnetic signal. The drone lasted 4 seconds. Riva killed the feed remotely and pulled the drone's last coordinates. She switched to the satellite view and found Darren. He had not moved. He was standing at the basin's edge, watching. The iron hollow swung its wide, flat head in slow arcs, reading the air. Its sensory pits ran along its jaw and down its neck, thermal and vibration detection. The survey reports had said. No eyes. It did not need them. It turned toward Darren. Riva opened her mouth and then closed it. There was nothing she could do from up here. She watched. Darren lay down. Not a fall. A controlled, deliberate movement. He lowered himself flat against the warm rock shelf at the basin's edge, face down, and he went completely still. His breathing, from what she could read on the biometric feed, slowed to something that barely registered. The iron hollow moved toward him. It covered the distance slowly, tasting the ground as it came, its body rolling in that heavy, rhythmic motion that said it weighed more than anything had a right to weigh. It reached the rock shelf. It stopped 2 meters from Darren. The rock itself was warm from the morning sun. Darren had pressed himself against the warmest part of the shelf. His heat signature blurred into the stone around him. The hollow searched. It moved its head back and forth in slow sweeps, reading the faint tremble of the world beneath it. For 6 full minutes it stood there. It began to move away. That was when Darren heard the sound small. A clicking, distressed chirp coming from beneath a section of debris the hollow had thrown up when erupted. Rock slabs and compacted earth shifted and stacked. Something was underneath it. Something alive and very small. He waited until the adult hollow had moved 30 meters away and turned its back. Then he lifted his head and looked at the debris pile. The chirping came again. He crossed the ground slowly in the careful, weight-distributed walk he used on ice and reached the debris. He could see a small limb pressed through a gap in the rock slabs, the same gray-white color as the adult, but the size of his forearm, a juvenile. Pinned under the eruption debris, he began moving rock. Piece by piece, testing each one before he shifted it, checking what was weight-bearing and what would cascade if pulled wrong. It was slow work. The juvenile made sounds high, rapid distress calls, and Darren kept his movements steady and quiet, and every few minutes he made a low sound back at it. Not words, just something constant and calm, the way he had always talked to injured animals. "You are okay. I am here. Nothing about me is a threat." The adult returned. IT came back fast, drawn by the juvenile's calls, and stopped 10 meters away. It faced Darren. Riva was gripping the edge of her console with both hands. Darren did not stop working. He did not look at the adult. He kept moving rock, kept making that low, steady sound. He freed the juvenile's trapped leg from the last slab and eased it out into the open air. The juvenile's distress call slowed, then stopped. The adult moved closer. It lowered its wide head near the juvenile, the sensory pits along its jaw reading the small creature's body, checking for injury, checking for stress, reading the biological signals that said, "Safe." Whatever that thing is, it is not a predator. The adult raised its head and faced Aaron for a long, still moment. Then it turned and nudged the juvenile gently back toward the basin. They went underground together. Darren sat on a rock shelf. He wrote in his notebook. His hands were steady. Back in the council chamber, no one was saying anything. Shravan sat with his hands flat on the desk and stared at the feed. One of his advisors quietly left the room. Then another. Riva kept typing. She did not stop until she had written every detail down. The ridge was the highest point in the wastes, and on the morning of the third day, Darren needed the elevation. His hand-drawn map of territory boundaries covered 3 pages of his notebook now. He had a good sense of the ground-level geography, but he needed to see how the upper terrain connected. High ground would give him that he climbed. The rock here was older and more fractured, with wide shelves and deep vertical cracks that made for slow going. He moved carefully, checking holds before he trusted them, staying close to the rock face. The wind picked up as he gained height. Below him, the rust-colored basin stretched out wide and flat, and he could see the dusk stalker pack moving along their morning patrol line, small at this distance, steady, following the same route they had followed yesterday. That he was nearly at the ridgeline when the sound hit him. It was not a sound so much as a physical force, a sharp, focused pressure wave that struck him from the left and knocked his sense of balance sideways. His grip held, but his vision blurred for a second, and he pressed his face against the rock and breathed through it. His ears rang, not painful, but disorienting, like standing too close to a struck bell. He looked up. The screaming crown was already circling back for a second pass. The survey reports had described it as an aerial predator, and the description was accurate, but the reports had not conveyed the quality of it. The way it moved with a precision that was closer to engineering than to flying. Its wingspan was wide, its body compact, and the vocal structure along its throat was visible even at distance. A layered, ribbed arrangement that the reports said could focus sound the way a lens focused light. Darren understood immediately what he had walked into. Nesting territory. The crown was defending. The second pass came fast. He tucked his face down and covered his ears with his forearms and let the pressure wave roll over him. It was stronger this time, a direct, focused burst aimed at his equilibrium. His boots scraped against the rock, but he did not fall. The crown pulled up and began climbing for a third pass. Darren took one hand off the rock face and started to whistle that IT was not a random sound. He had been listening to the crown's call since the first strike. Not just the attack burst, but the shorter sounds it made between passes, the descending call it used when it banked. That last one had a pattern. He whistled it back, as close as a human mouth could manage. Low, then dropping, then a short terminal click against his teeth. The crown stopped climbing. IT hung in the air about 40 meters above him and stared down at him with wide amber eyes. Darren did it again. The descending call. The click. Then he added the short warning chirp he had heard at the very beginning, before the first strike. The crown's wing beats changed rhythm. It tilted its head. He had its attention in a different way now. Not prey attention. Something else. Something that wanted to figure him out. IT descended slowly and landed on a wide shelf about 12 meters above his position. It folded its wings with a sharp, precise motion and stood there watching him with the focused stillness of something that was very good at making decisions. Darren climbed up to the shelf below it and sat down with his back against the rock. He kept the whistle pattern going, not constantly, just every minute or so. A conversation at low volume. He was not sure what he was saying, but he was saying something, and the crown was listening. After a while, he noticed the way it kept adjusting one wing. A small, compensating motion. He looked more carefully at the leading edge of the left wing and saw it. A dark fragment embedded near the second joint. The skin around it had healed over in a rough ring. Old, probably months. The wing worked, but not at full range. He reached into his kit and took out the field medical pouch. He sat on the rock in front of him and opened it slowly, without looking at the crown, without any fast movement. He laid the tools out one by one. Then he waited. It took 40 minutes. The crown watched every movement. Eventually, it stepped down from its shelf, placed itself 2 meters from him, and folded its good wing tight against its body while the other rested at an outward angle. Darren worked slowly. He kept making the low whistle pattern with his breath as he cleaned the wound site. The fragment came free cleanly. He closed the wound with the adhesive strip from his kit and sat back. The crown opened both wings to their full span, testing. Both moved evenly. It held them out for a moment, feeling the difference. Then it looked at him, not the assessing look from before. Something quieter than that. It lifted off and caught an updraft and rose until it was a shape against the pale sky. Darren watched it go, then continued up to the ridgeline and got his elevation reading and updated his map. On the way back down, he looked over his shoulder. The crown was circling above him in wide, lazy arcs. It followed him all the way to the basin floor. When he stopped and sat to write his notes, it landed on a rock outcrop 20 meters away and settled its wings and sat there, watching the horizon the way a creature does when it has decided it is not going anywhere. In the council chamber, Breck had come in from the outer offices and was watching the feed in silence. He stood with his arms folded and said nothing for a long time. Then he said, quietly, to no one in particular, "He is not surviving that planet. He is learning it." No one answered. No one disagreed. On the 4th day, the wastes were different in a way that was hard to name. Same dry ground, same flat light, same iron smell on the wind. But Darren had been here long enough that the land had begun to organize itself clearly in his mind. He knew where the dusk stalker pack bedded during the heat of midday. He knew the approach paths the iron hollow used when it surfaced. He knew the updrafts the crown favored for its morning circuits. He moved through the territory the way a ranger moves through a forest he spent years learning. Not carefully, exactly, but respectfully. Knowing whose ground it was, the young adult stalker had started following him 2 days ago. Not the juvenile from the first day, an outer rank adult from the pack, lower in the hierarchy, more curious than the dominant ones. It kept roughly 40 meters back and moved when Darren moved. He had stopped logging it separately. It was just there. He sat in the center basin at midday to eat from his ration pack. The stalker was to the north. The crown was somewhere above the ridge. The iron hollow had surfaced twice that morning at the south end and had not gone back down, resting in the sun with the slow patience of something that had nowhere it needed to be. He was writing in his notebook when the beacon activated. IT came through on the emergency band in his kit communicator, a standard sovereignty trial beacon, automated distress signal. The coordinates placed it roughly 2 kilometers to the northeast. Inside the waste, he checked the channel identifier. Tharvan registration code. A different species, a different assigned sector, but the coordinates were deep inside Veil territory. A crash landing, most likely. Off-course vessel, wrong ground. He packed his kit and stood. The stalker raised its head from 40 meters away and watched him. Darren walked northeast. He heard the second dust stalker pack before he saw them. Their territorial challenge call, rapid, overlapping clicks building into a low growl, was a sound he had come to know well. He came over a low rock rise and saw the situation clearly. The Tharvan was backed against a large section of their wrecked landing vessel, a torn hull plate half buried in the earth at a steep angle. Four-armed, roughly his height, pale skin with fine scales along the arms. One arm was held at a bad angle. fractured by the look of it. A deep gash across the shoulder had bled down the front of their suit. They were not moving, either playing dead or out of options. The pack surrounding them was a different group from Darren's territory. 6 adults, all teeth visible, circling at close range and calling to each other with the tight, clipped sounds that meant they had already decided. Darren walked down the slope and directly into the circle. He did not run, and he did not stop. He walked at a normal pace, and he made the same low, steady sound he had been making for 4 days. Not a command, not aggression, just presence. Constant and calm. The circle froze. The pack leaders turned to face him. Darren looked at the ground between himself and them. Not submission, not challenge. A middle space. He was not prey, and he was not a challenger. He was a known thing. And behind him, the stalker from his territory had reached the rise and made its own sound. A contact call, territorial and clear. This ground is known. The 2 packs exchanged calls. It lasted a long 2 minutes. Darren stood in the center of it without moving. The Tharvan watched from behind the hull plate with an expression that said they had stopped understanding the situation several minutes ago. The second pack broke. Not a retreat, exactly a withdrawal. A decision that this ground was contested and not worth the energy. They moved off to the west, and their noise faded with the distance. Darren walked to the Tharvan and crouched down in front of them. He opened his med kit. "You are okay," he said. "I'm going to look at your arm." The Tharvan's translator crackled, and then their voice came through, unsteady. "What are you?" "Darren," he said. He began checking the arm. Fractured, not compound. He could splint it. "We are both in a trial zone that was not designed for us to come back from. But I think we're doing fine." He worked on the arm and the shoulder wound while his stalker settled into the shadow of a nearby rock formation and watched with half-closed eyes. The crown made a slow pass overhead, its wide shadow crossing the ground. The Tharvan kept looking between Darren and the stalker, between the stalker and the crown, and then back at Darren, with an expression he recognized. He had seen it before on the faces of people who had come out of something very bad and were not sure yet if the next thing was also bad. "It is fine," he said, wrapping the splint. "They're just sitting." The Tharvan's breathing slowly steadied in the council chamber. The room had gone quiet in a way that was different from before. Before, it had been the quiet of people waiting for a death. Now it was something harder to name. Shravan sat with both hands flat on his desk, and the feed played, and nobody said anything. Breck stood near the back of the room with his arms folded. One of the council members said, quietly, that they thought the trial should be called. Shravan said nothing. Riva's voice came through the observer channel, even and clear. Field note, hour 92. Candidate Cole has located and treated an off-course Tharvan trial candidate. Both are stable. I am formally recommending immediate extraction. The room stayed quiet. Breck looked at Shravan for a long moment. Then he walked to the door without a word and went to arrange the dropship himself. On the 5th morning, the extraction team came. Darren heard the dropship before he saw it. A low thrum from the south, still distant but already dropping through the upper cloud layer. He was sitting outside the shelter he had built for the Tharvan, who was sleeping better now that the arm was properly set. He had kept a small fire through the night, same as every night. Visible, warmed out, he stood, stretched, and picked up his notebook. The stalker raised its head from the rock shadow 20 meters away. The crown, which had begun roosting nearby at night, lifted off the ridge with a single wing beat and caught the morning thermals. It did not go far. It circled. The dropship broke through the low cloud and came down over the basin in a wide arc, reading the ground. Darren raised one hand so they could find him on the visual feed. The ship slowed, then slowed more. He could see the moment the pilot understood what was below, because the ship held position for almost a full minute before beginning its final approach. Darren was standing in the open basin. The Dust Stalker pack was to his left, his young adult plus 4 others that had drifted in toward dawn. Following some instinct he had stopped trying to name. They stood with the easy posture of animals that were not concerned. The iron hollow rested at the south end of the basin, its massive body still and slow in the early sun. The crown circled above, casting a wide, lazy shadow across the cracked earth. The ship landed 60 meters away, and the ramp came down. Breck came out first. Full field armor, but his weapon was not drawn. He stopped at the bottom of the ramp and stood there for a moment, just looking at the basin. Behind him, the extraction team came to the edge of the ramp and stopped. No one walked further. Breck crossed the ground to Darren. They stood facing each other. The stalker had gotten to its feet. Not aggressive, just present, the way a dog stands when a stranger approaches its person. Breck looked past Darren at the stalker, then at the crown wheeling overhead, then south at the Iron Hollow. "Cole," he said. "Marshall," Darren said. Breck was quiet for a moment. "Ow!" Darren considered the question. They were not trying to kill me. They were reading me, figuring out if I was prey or a threat. And you were neither. I was a ranger, Darren said. That is what rangers do. You go into someone else's territory and you learn the rules they are already living by. You do not fight the rules. You follow them. Breck looked at the stalker again for a long moment. Then he nodded once, the way someone nods when they have understood something they should have understood earlier. "The Tharvan is in the shelter," Darren said. "Fractured arm, shoulder laceration. Both treated. They need a medical bay." Breck signaled the team. 2 medics started forward, moving carefully, watching the animals the whole way. Darren turned and walked back toward the center of the basin. He stopped and looked at the stalker for a moment, then at the crown above, then south at the hollow, still and enormous in the light. He stood there for a while, the way you stand in a place before you leave it. Then he turned and walked to the ramp. The council chamber was full by the time Breck's suit camera feed reached the main display. Stravon was present, but his seat was no longer at the head of the table. 3 of his allies had removed themselves from the committee pending the formal inquiry that Riva's report had triggered. The leaked footage had been running on the public sovereignty feed for 30 hours. Stravon made one final motion, that the trial be ruled incomplete due to irregular circumstances. Breck stood. He read from the charter in a level. Carrying voice, survival of the assigned zone for the assigned duration, confirmed. Duration exceeded by 48 hours. Secondary candidate located, treated, and stabilized. No clause in the charter required the candidate to be in danger. Only that they remain within the zone boundaries and survived. He set the charter down on the table. Under Section 12, the ruling is not a matter of opinion. It is mandatory. The vote took 4 minutes. Stravon abstained. Every other present member voted in full. Humanity was granted galactic sovereignty citizenship, effective immediately. After the chamber cleared, Riva found Darren at the long observation window. The sovereignty capital spread out below, towers, transit lanes, lights going on as the evening came in. He had his notebook open and was writing something, as he always seemed to be. She came to stand beside him. "They built that trial to stop you," she said. "I know." She looked at the side of his face. "Were you not afraid?" "Even a little." He was quiet for a moment. The lights of the Capitol moved below them, slow and bright. "The animals were doing what animals do," he said. "They had rules, and I learned the rules. None of it was personal." He looked out at the dark above the city, where the first stars were becoming visible. "The ones in this chamber, they bent rules they wrote themselves to make sure an entire species failed before it even started. That is a different kind of thing." He closed the notebook. Riva looked at the stars for a while. She thought about the dusk stalker standing at the edge of the basin, watching the ship lift off. The crown circling once, and then returning to the ridge. The Iron Hollow, still and patient in the morning light. She thought about a man with a paper notebook and no weapons, sitting down in the middle of all of it, and simply choosing not to be afraid. She did not ask anything else. She did not think there was anything left to ask.